A famous philosopher once asked the question, when we all fall asleep, where do we go? Well, if not one, but two games this year have anything to say about it, it's that we end up in some kind of horrific pain dimension where everything is trying to kill us and violence is the only solution. But where Nightmare Reaper went whole hog with crazy movement schemes and randomized weaponry in a 30-hour campaign, today's game, Nightmare of Decay, is more of a short, slow burn exercise in survival horror that does what it came to do, then leaves you with a tease and a wink and wanting for more. From developer Checkmatey, who, from what I can tell, appears to just be a one-man operation, Nightmare of Decay is soaked in blood-stained nostalgia for early PlayStation survival horror, primarily Resident Evil, but with the twist of being played from a first-person perspective. We play as an unnamed protagonist who, after watching a news report on people complaining of powerful nightmares and then mysteriously dying soon after, goes to sleep and wakes up inside of a nightmare, where people either die in their dreams or go insane. Our objective is to wander through a huge mansion filled with zombies, cultists, spiders, and all kinds of survival horror tropes in search of a way to wake up. Now, you know what I fucking love, kids? Games that are obviously drawing inspiration from other established games while presenting a neat little twist on the formula. Resident Evil in first person? Well, shit, that's never been done. I said that's never been done before! But jokes aside, a first-person PlayStation survival horror game is exactly the kind of hook that you can use to get my attention and bait me into buying your game. But one of my favorite trends in gaming recently is the lo-fi horror scene, with crude, crunchy, low-poly graphics and old-school gameplay. Lo-fi horror has been fucking knocking it out of the park in terms of moving horror games forward while simultaneously reaching into the back pocket of nostalgia. It's basically the horror version of the retro shooter scene, and a lot of these lo-fi horror games are super short, clocking in at a couple of hours tops, making for short, sweet excursions into terror while being either free to play or only a couple of bucks to own. Nightmare of Decay stacks up pretty well in this regard. The story mode is only like 2.5 hours long, you get a pretty decent amount of stuff to do in that period of time, it's only $5 on Steam, and as a bonus, after beating the main story, there's extra game modes that unlock for more replayability. But one thing at a time. Nightmare of Decay's atmosphere is suitably dreamlike and sometimes unsettling, but never quite fully submerges into outright terrifying. This isn't from a lack of taking itself seriously, as Checkmatey clearly understands and demonstrates a love for the genre, but rather the game capitalizes on the concept of being stuck in a dream to craft a world and an experience that allows for a touch of the old tongue-in-cheek, while still brazenly embracing some of the wackier concepts of older PS1-era survival horror. For example, the opening has you watch the news, eat some pizza, hallucinate a psycho with a decapitated head, fall asleep, wake up buried alive, encounter a talking cat, and kill a zombie. In other words,
it was Tuesday.
As you go through the mansion in search of a way out, we encounter shooting galleries, which let us practice our aiming skills in return for prizes, a puzzle involving moving and manipulating a suit of armor, armed cultists, a meat golem, even giant spiders. And from start to finish, Nightmare of Decay walks a deft tightrope between cheesy fun and creepy visuals. I mean, one of the first things that happens in the game is the news report, and the reporter sounds like this. Fucking what? And inside the nightmare, if you look up while outside, you'll see the moon has a cheesy evil grin. There's an odd creature who lives inside of a flesh hole. No, I need to rewrite that line. That's just not gonna fly. There's an odd creature that lives in a hole in the wall who offers you a reward if you can bring him 3 decapitated heads. And the best gag in the entire game involves a hideous beast in the caves below the cavern. You're warned by a dying man outside the caves to just run if you come across the beast, as you'll probably die if you try to fight it. And of course, after grabbing an item we need to unlock a puzzle, we turn around to find... Oh, hold on a second. He's so cute. He couldn't possibly be all that bad.
Jesus Christ!
But for all the little bits that make you giggle a little bit at the absurdity, there's shit like the ghost of a dead woman that can only be seen in a mirror nearby. There's unnerving paintings hung throughout the manor. The wall monster has heads growing out of the rim of his hole. Oh, I really can't talk about that thing without just sounding really wrong, can I? But the heads all moan and make awful sounds while you're standing there, like no thank you. There's even a couple genuine jump scares spaced throughout the game. Nightmare of Decay doesn't go for jumpiness, but when it's effective, oh man, look at this. This was the moment that fucked me up the hardest. There's a couple of chests in the game that you can find and they have helpful items in them. So of course I ran up to this one and it turns into a mimic. And that's literally the only time that happens in the game too. If you pay attention to the footage, you can see the camera jump when the mimic pops out. Like I literally jumped that hard. Oh, and the first time you meet the cultists is fucking... God. So everything generally moves either fairly slowly or a little faster than fairly slowly. And this is again in part to the whole survival horror throwback aspect. But when I first encountered the cultists, who are all armed with pistols or shotguns, the dude moved so fast that I jumped out of my skin. Like, oh shit, you should not be able to move that fast, fuck! Something moving that fast in a game like this is an immediate cause for concern. Despite being a first-person perspective, Nightmare of Decay is no run-and-gun exercise. No. Combat plays out in a very measured, paced, careful manner, just like the games of old, in which your movement was slow, sometimes a little awkward, and aiming your weapon at enemies required patience and not panicking in the middle of combat. And, just like back then, the name of the game here is making those headshots, because otherwise you're wasting a lot of ammo shooting enemies anywhere else. Since Nightmare of Decay is first person, there's an element of not having to deal with making sure our aim is on target because we have mouse controls for that sort of thing. So the way the game compensates for this is that your aim becomes super imprecise if you're walking or after you've just fired your weapon. You'll notice the target reticle bloom outward in these moments, and after a moment of being still, it tightens back up again to let you know that your next shot will be more precise. So there's not going to be any circle strafing here in this game. There's only the risk of having to stand as still as possible in order to get a clean shot, followed by the reward of actually landing those headshots and taking down zombies while using as little ammunition as possible. Of course, the flip side to this is that sometimes you will find yourself surrounded and outnumbered if you're not paying close enough attention to the environment, which leads to firing wildly and trying not to panic as you see all of your shots going wide and maybe only hitting half of your targets. The number one thing to remember is that you do not want enemies getting close enough to grab you. If they do, you only have a few seconds to get in a powerful enough attack to shake them off, or they're going to do enough serious damage that it's game fucking over. I admittedly wasn't a fan of the grapple system. It is way too easy to sustain way too much damage if a zombie grabs you in this game. In older survival horror games, if you got grabbed, you could mash buttons and shake off your attacker at the very least and get yourself to a different position for fighting. But here, it almost seems like a consequence of combat that you allowed yourself to get too close to the zombies, so you either have to think fast or you're just dead. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's fine and all, but it's a real hassle when you, say, encounter the game's second boss, the Chainsaw Psycho. And if he even taps you with his chainsaw, you're straight up dead, because you pretty much can't escape that attack. You're just outright done for, my dude. While this mechanic isn't enough to detract from the gameplay experience overall, I think it would have been nice to have something where we could shake ourselves loose from an enemy grapple like in the games that this game draws inspiration from, so we're not just fucked in those situations. I mean, you could always try running away from or around zombies so you don't get got, something that is a staple of any good survival horror game. After all, nothing says ammo conservation like literally running away. But again, since it's a little easier to run around enemies in first-person mouse look versus third-person tank controls, the stamina meter comes into play. What I like about the stamina meter is that in areas free and clear of enemies, it doesn't appear at all. You can run around as much as you like and never get tired. But when enemies are in the area, the stamina meter goes into effect. So you need to keep one eye on the bar to make sure you don't accidentally run down into exhausted mode, which leaves you panting and trudging extra slow for a few vulnerable seconds. Reloading weapons also forces slower movement for a few seconds as well. Movement here is super tactical, much more than a casual glance would think, and the way Checkmatey implements it really evokes the same principles of tank controls, but translated really well into WASD mechanics. It's good shit. Speaking of good shit, look at these graphics. Holy toast. Man, oh man, did they capture that PS1 vibe here. Like late PS1 graphics or maybe even Sega Saturn. The lighting effects, oh my god. I can't tell if the lighting is pre-rendered or real-time or what, but even if it is real-time, it so effectively mimics the look of pre-rendered lighting from old Resident Evil games that I was mesmerized. Yeah, this is just a joy to look at. Alright, so combat is mostly good, the story is pretty good, the graphics are fantastic. Do we have any downsides here? Well, the game is pretty short, which isn't necessarily bad considering the game is, again, only $5 on Steam, and we're talking short form lo-fi horror. So I honestly walked in expecting it to be a shorter experience. But even clocking in at 2.5 hours, I feel like most of the experience was running back and forth from one area of the manor to the other. You know the drill. Pick up an item, realize where you need to take that item, run to the spot where you can use the item, open up a new area, find a new item, realize where you need to go to use that item, run all the way back to that spot, wash, rinse, repeat. One of the things that I'm finding that I dislike about older survival horror games are the more tedious aspects, like running back and forth across a really big area after you've cleared the map of zombies and you're just running and running. And you're like, oh, for fuck's sake, this key that I finally found opens up a door all the way on the other side of the fucking map. And I would say that Nightmare of Decay's biggest sin is the backpacking and backtracking. Considering the run speed isn't really all that fast, it definitely feels a bit sloggy at times. Whenever I decided to take a break from playing, it wasn't because of fatigue or anything like that. It was because I was like, oh, I don't feel like running all the way back to that one room right now. I'm close to a save point. I'm going to save and then build up the willpower to slog through this. But at the same time, most of the backtracking comes in service to completing the side quests and finding hidden bits which will build up your supplies. The meat golem and the monster bunny rabbit bosses, completely optional. You can run away from them and not kill them and carry on with the game, and it's super chill. The only bosses that are mandatory are the Chainsaw Psycho and the final boss, the Lord of Nightmare, who was a little underwhelming, but otherwise you can grab what you need and keep on trucking. There's an achievement for beating the game in under an hour, which is wild. There's also achievements for beating the game without sprinting and without healing and without using any ranged weapons, which are all pretty cool and all, but I honestly couldn't imagine playing through the story mode more than, say, twice. Once on normal to get used to it, and once on hard for the challenge. After that, it just kind of feels a little weightless. But here's where we get into the extra modes. Upon beating the game, we're treated to the Endless mode and Horde mode. Horde mode is exactly like it says on the box, and Endless mode, which is a real neat treat, of a procedurally generated dungeon for you to run through and see how many floors you can complete. You'll find credits throughout the floor that you're on, which you can use at the store between floors to purchase health, extra ammo, better weapons, hell, even weapons that aren't in the story mode, like a Tommy gun and a rocket launcher. Endless mode redeems the somewhat Spartan story mode in that now we have a cool little side game where we can run around, kill zombies, see how far we can get, kind of like a lo-fi horror spelunky. And while I'm not sure if there's an end game for Endless mode, I'm actually probably going to put in some time and see how far I can get. Overall, Nightmare of Decay is a pleasant little surprise that's not only worth your time, but worth your money. The throwback atmosphere, the tongue-in-cheek meta humor, the overall game feel is really solid and genuinely enjoyable. Sure, the puzzles are super basic and won't hurt your brain noodle, but they're designed to resemble the classic puzzles that lovers of the genre remember. If anything, Nightmare of Decay is a straight-up love letter to Resident Evil and 90s survival horror. There's references to a lot of games in here. Imagine my surprise when I saw James from Silent Hill 2 just get murked out of nowhere. I think the worst thing that I can say about it is that, at the end of the day, even with Endless mode and Horde mode, there just isn't enough to the story mode to make me want to come back and play that mode again. It certainly made me wish that there was more of it, which in turn makes me hope that Checkmatey makes a full-blown sequel or a spiritual successor with a longer story mode and uses this game as a springboard to jump off of. And that, plus the level of enjoyment that you'll get out of playing through it at least once, that's worth the price of admission and supporting the developer. I'm gonna give Nightmare of Decay an 8 out of 10. All right, kids. Spooky month is still in full effect, and I have one more game to play, and that video is going to drop, naturally, on Halloween, and I am so fucking excited to play that one. If you haven't been following the news, Scorn is finally fucking releasing this month. After close to 8 years of development, easily one of my personally most anticipated games of the last decade. So you know, I don't have my hopes high or anything. I hope you kids are enjoying the spooks this year, and that you're drinking plenty of water to combat the sugar high you'll no doubt be feeling with all of the candy, and that you're staying safe out there. I'll see you next time.